Hey guys, this is part 2 in my 286 restoration series. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, you really should check that out. In part 1, I restored the case and power supply, did a full recap on that power supply, got it up and running. Part 2 is going to focus more on the internals of the system, specifically the motherboard. But before we get to that, I do want to mention the 3.5 floppy bezel. If you saw part 1, you remember that was a really dark brown color, really didn't match the aesthetics of the case. So I found a spray paint that matches the color perfectly. If I turn off the camera flash for a moment, you'll see what a delightful color match that really is. I'll leave the details on that paint in the video description in case it might be useful to anyone. But let's get the cover off this case, and we'll take a look at that motherboard. So we left off in part 1 talking about the Varda battery on this board. Now, to be accurate, that's not a Varda battery. That's a modern replacement. That's a nickel metal hydride battery, not the original nickel cadmium battery that would have been on this board. Various sources indicate that the nickel metal hydride batteries are actually a drop-in replacement for the old Varda batteries. I did some research myself, and I'm not entirely convinced it would be a good idea to leave that battery on the board. So the first thing I want to do is remove the motherboard from the case, and we'll replace that nickel metal hydride battery with a modern CR2032. So here you see the nickel metal hydride battery. It really does look exactly like the old Varda batteries. That was part of the appeal. It matches the aesthetic so perfectly. So I really was kind of disappointed to hear that it may be dangerous to leave that on the board. Now, the Varda battery that was on the board had leaked. It had been removed by the time the board came to me. But really, the damage is not too severe. None of the traces were broken. And in fact, I simply cleaned up the corrosion on the board and covered the damaged area with some clear nail polish to prevent any further damage. So I've got the CR2032 socket in there. Before I can put a battery in, we have to make sure that this board is not going to try to charge the battery. Lithium cells don't react terribly well to that sort of thing. So the elegant way of fixing that is to decipher the charging circuit on the board and disable it properly. Usually you need to cut a trace or remove a diode, something of that nature. And well, I spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to figure out how this charging circuit works on this board, and I'm going to be honest, I couldn't figure it out. So ultimately, I just soldered a diode in series with the battery. We're still getting a little bit of reverse voltage through that diode, but not enough to cause any serious issues. Yeah, so there were two other major modifications that I made to this board. First, the board initially had 30-pin SIP sockets instead of 30-pin SIM sockets. Now, SIP memory is getting rather difficult to find, and when you do find it, oftentimes I found it's rather expensive, and quite frankly, it's a bit of a pain to deal with, so I decided to replace the SIP sockets on this board with new old stock SIM sockets. Now, I don't have any footage of that, unfortunately, but I do have another video here where I did a very similar repair. And the other change that I made, this board came with a very basic BIOS, a very simple BIOS. Now, I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. I've reinserted the old BIOS chips. Let's boot into that BIOS, and we'll take a quick poke around. So there's not a lot we can configure in this BIOS. In fact, there's only this one page of settings, and if I scroll through the hard drive options, you'll notice there's no option there to set a custom drive type, which would definitely be a bit of a limitation for us. Now, there's a few different solutions to that problem. I chose a very direct approach of replacing the BIOS chips with the BIOS chips from another 286 board, one that offers a little bit more in the way of options. This is the Quad-Tel BIOS. If we go in there, you can see right away that this BIOS is much more elaborate. Yeah, among other things, I can specify a custom hard drive type. So let's drop some settings in there for the moment. We'll save that information. So the other option that I had, there's a project called XTIDE. A lot of you have probably heard of it. And basically, it's a BIOS extension that allows you to use larger hard drives, custom drive types. I may talk about that in another video, but no, for today, I'm simply going to use the Quad-Tel BIOS. I've had good results with this one before. So I've got the board mounted back in the case. It's held in there with 2 screws. That was pretty common back in the day. And you can see we've got those little plastic standoffs. Now, unfortunately, the mounting hardware in this case was actually bent, so the board sits a little bit low. I didn't realize that at the time. This video card is partially out of the ISA socket. It should make enough contact to work properly, but that card really should sit a little bit lower in the socket. Okay, so I've installed a controller card as well. That's the floppy and IDE controller. Now, this particular card doesn't have parallel or serial capabilities, so I've added a separate serial parallel card in the background there. And then, of course, we need a floppy cable. You see that twist in the cable there? That indicates drive A. In my case, that's going to be the 3.5 1.44 meg floppy drive. And down below here, I have my 5.25. That's a 1.2 meg 5.25 with the card edge connector. There's my 3.5 up here. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a period-appropriate hard drive to go with this system. I'd really like to have something like an 80 meg IDE drive, but that's okay. I do have a compact flash adapter and a 48 meg card. It would have been pretty common back in the day to have a 30 meg drive or maybe a 50 meg. So my 48 meg card is reasonably period appropriate. Yeah, that card can easily be swapped out from the back of the computer. And I've got a couple empty slots there. I'm actually going to install a sound card later on. But for now, let's fire the system up and we'll go into BIOS. We need to set the parameters for that compact flash card. Oh, don't worry about that keyboard error. That's just me hammering on the keyboard to try and get into BIOS. Here we are. I've got the drive A set as the 1.44 meg 3.5. Drive B set as the 1.2 meg 5.25. And I've got the hard drive parameters entered. Now I already have a copy of DOS 622 on that compact flash card. 622 is actually a little bit too new for a 286. If this system is from 1990, it would be more appropriate to have either DOS 3, perhaps 3.3, or even 4 on the system. DOS 4, by all accounts, was a bit of a buggy mess, so I probably won't be installing that version. So I'm just going to run a couple of quick tests here with Checkit and make sure everything is okay. So in part 3 of this series, I'll do a fresh install of the operating system. We'll configure that sound card, and we'll get some period-appropriate software in the system, some games, and probably some productivity software as well. So yeah, if you enjoyed this one, please stick around for part 3. Feel free to like and subscribe. And beyond that, thanks for watching.